Thank you for joining me today on our CE National Digital Lab. My name's Eric Miller, and I have with me today the Carraways. We've got Dayne and Ana. I'll let you figure out who is who, but they have three beautiful kids now. I almost forgot about Camilla. Three beautiful kids, Cole, Chase, and Camilla. And I've known Dayne for a very long time. Back when I was a youth pastor in Frederick, Maryland, Dayne was a wee lad. He was a student in the youth ministry at Clinton Grace Church, and now he has been the youth pastor for Dayne. How long were you the youth pastor there?
I was there for 7 years.
What's it, 7? I couldn't remember. I thought it was almost 10 even, but so 7 years. Awesome guy. Great to have Dayne and Ana. My wife and I have gotten to love this couple, and we've got to spend some time with them. We're talking today about racial tension and justice in our world today. And so we wanted to invite these guys to have a conversation with us about this. Dayne and his wife, they're planting a church in Towson, Maryland, just north of Baltimore. It's called the Church at the Well. Did I get that right? Church at the Well. You can check out their website. It's www.thewellbaltimore.com. So check that out. There's some cool stuff going on there. God's going to do some big things in this church and through this couple and their family. And I'm excited to have them on with us today for our digital lab. So the goal of these conversations with CE National, we desperately want to help you be equipped to understand things that are going on in our culture today. But the goal for today is really to speak biblically into racial tension and injustice that we see in our culture today, with the latest of a long line of many shootings of Ahmaud Arbery. We in Georgia, we're yet again reminded that racism still exists in our world today. And as believers, as Christ followers, we have a huge opportunity to fight against that. But how do we do that? So today we want to dive into that topic a little bit. And Dayne, this is a conversation that is not new to you and I. We've known each other for a long time and done ministry together and partnered together in a lot of ways through Momentum Youth Conference. You may know Dayne as the DJ. You may know him as rapper extraordinaire, but mostly no, but mostly I have known Dayne as a brother in the Lord, and Dayne has been an awesome friend. And so I'm excited to have him and his wife on to talk about all of this today. So Dayne, years ago, you and I did a parent track at our church where we got to talk about racial tension in our world today. And you did a fantastic job with that. And so you were one of the first people that came to my mind. I know you've spoke on this at Momentum Youth Conference before, which, by the way, Momentum fans, keep your ears to the ground, because next week we'll have a big announcement for you about Momentum. So let's dive in. Let's dive into this conversation. Let's just for a second put all the I run with Mod kind of stuff aside, and let's just think for a second about for you guys as a family. Now, obviously, interracial marriage for you guys. How does this kind of stuff, the feeling of racism in our culture today, how does it affect you as a family?
Wow. So first off, thanks for having us, guys. We're really excited to be doing this, and we feel honored to be invited to this conversation. Sometimes when I get invited to talk about things, and even the last time I was invited at Momentum, I declined. And, I really just, spiritually just wrestled with it. And in the fact that I know that we've, in comparison to the stories and the people that we even know, we are in a privileged position where we haven't faced it as much as other folks have. In our relationship, in our marriage, besides a few snide comments, besides some funny looks walking through St. Charles Mall, or when she went to school in Ohio, some instances. Actually, I have on to share one instance of when she was at the Ohio State. We haven't faced it always head on. What I would say specifically as us as a couple, we started dating when we were in high school and just moving up through the years, is more so, I think that systematic racism definitely exists, and obviously this is what it stems from over the course of history, of American history, into where we are right now. I think it exists. I still think systematic racism exists, but more so in the form of suspicion. So what that means is that we're more suspicious of people, or more suspicious of people from a different background, and that informs the way that we view people. So that's what I would say. When she was going to Ohio State, she had an instance where she saw a big difference in shifting of mindsets for those cultural differences.
Yeah, so I think, as Dayne said, as a family, we really have to say that we are blessed. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I grew up in a military community. The military was integrating housing and schools 30, 40 years before the rest of America. So in terms of the community that I was growing up in, race was not really a conversation. We were living all across the world. But as I went to college and I was encountering people who very much had different, just a different way of growing up. And I did have someone that I met at church. She went to small group with me, and we were considering being roommates. And her family came and just walked through the townhouse we were living in, and they saw a picture of Dayne and I, and the conversation shut down. And I didn't know what was going on. I truly didn't understand what was happening. It got very awkward very fast. And later on, I circled back with a friend without her family there. And I said, like, what's going on? Like, are you signing the lease tomorrow? And this whole conversation came up. And basically what she articulated to me was that she believed that interracial dating was unbiblical. And her claim was that Bible says, do not be unequally yoked. And so I'm speaking back into that and saying, this has more to do with religious identity, not with racial identity. Then she also told me that you should only date someone if you plan to marry them. And at that point in time, I was like, yeah, I'm going to marry Dayne. I know this. And she said, oh, well, that's terrible because your children will have no identity in America. A mixed child does not fit in anywhere. And so what one stunned me was the bluntness of it. These were ideas that if anyone believed that, I thought they knew it was wrong enough to not vocalize it. But this is being vocalized to me in a very rational way. She thought she was informing me. And the thing that really bothered me was as I was becoming angry at that time, and we can talk later about responses and how to engage in these conversations, and I will be the first to admit that I was not always good at this, and I still have a way to go. But as I was becoming angry, there were other friends in the room, and no one else was becoming angry. No one else was reacting negatively, and everyone just brushed it off as, that's how it is. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that was a huge wake-up call, and it was also a call to question people of my generation, people of our generation, to, if you have learned a philosophy, a way of thinking from your parents and from your upbringing, how are you questioning that? Are you just adopting that as your own? Or are you going back and asking yourself, does this really truly line up with the Bible? So those were some hard questions. And again, that was when we were just dating and being questioned. And I do think location has had a lot to do with it. I think when we go out to the Midwest, and again, it's not terribly harmful, but I've been asked, are you running a daycare? Are those your kids? Okay. Or just waitresses assuming that we're not together and giving us different bills. Is that the most harmful thing?
Not, you know what I'm saying?
No.
It's not the worst thing.
That's truly, we have no right to complain about that, but it really does get at the heart of some assumptions that people make.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting as I've been preparing for this and just thinking some of this through and praying for, you guys as you prepare. One of the things that comes to my mind is I think as a white American, we often don't have the kind of encounters or experiences that maybe you would, Dayne, or Ana, even having mixed kids, and it's so hard where you live with probably a fear that what would happen. And so, Dayne, I know you and I have had these conversations before of you've been prepared of if you get stopped at a traffic stop or by the police, or how you respond in that situation and what runs through your mind is totally different than what would run through my mind. Talk about that for just a couple minutes of what's your experience like with that?
Yeah, it's funny. So I'll talk about two specific situations. And one, I had, not realized the first time, my wife had to remind me the first time I ever got pulled over. And I totally blocked it out of my mind. So I was dropping her off one base, and this isn't, PG County cops, this is military police, which is a whole nother spiel. I was on Andrews Air Force Base, where they keep Air Force One. She was living there with her family. We were like 16. I was in my little 1999 Plymouth Neon. No room in my trunk for anything of substance because I had these huge speakers in the back, probably blasting something ignorant. Rolling down the street on Andrews Air Force Base, and there was a new stop sign that we found out later literally got installed that day. And I ran through the stop sign, then I realized that I ran through the stop sign, and when you're 16, you're like, oh no, I just made a mistake, stop driving. And so I stopped driving, I get pulled over by military police. Man, they were just rough. And when I first started to get pulled over, I was really nervous. They put me in handcuffs, and one guy held his hand on his waist, and I was just like went into this panic mode. Long story short, I was out of handcuffs in like 10 minutes, and they escorted me off base, and I never had a problem again. So as a kid, I always, even though like there's a big difference between military police and local enforcement, I had a fear of ever, getting ran over. That doesn't mean I ever got pulled over again. Virginia police know me very well on my way back and forth from Liberty University. Fast forward to a situation, I was out actually in Ohio. Shout out to my friend Mark Archer, Mark and Dave. I was out in Ohio this past year, and we drove from Columbus to Cleveland for a game. And I'm listening to Mark playing music, and I'm rolling, bro. And I'm just going way too fast. Did not know how fast I was going, and we get pulled over. But because I have attended so many of these seminars and have listened into these conversations that were specifically geared towards African-American men, how to handle yourself when a cop gets pulled over. It's not about whether you're being right or wrong or whatever the situation is. The goal is to get home that evening. So regardless, first off, I was going way too fast. I deserved to get pulled over. But specifically, I knew exactly what to do, and it had informed, just like having seminars and these kind of conversations, that the goal isn't to, if whether you're facing injustice or not, that obviously it shouldn't be the case. But in the same way, I got a family to get home to. I have God's work to get back to, and I'm not just going to buck authority for the sake of bucking authority, because the issue isn't with the position of a police officer. Obviously, there's more issues. So for me in that situation, lady came over. I had my wallet already out. I asked her for permission to move my hands around the things. And, I'm not going to try to trump up the conversation that we had that day, but I could tell that it left an impression on him that how well I handled that situation. Truth of the matter is, for the young guys that I know, when they start driving, I try to have these conversations with them, because it's one thing to watch the stories and to hear about when everything goes wrong. The goal is not that, the goal is that we don't have those situations. And if we could do anything to prevent them, regardless of the worldview of the police officer, the goal is to get home. So,
Yeah. I think it's important for us to always understand like a different perspective, and to realize like, I may not have walked that in that path or in your shoes in that, but I love hearing those stories, because it helps me better understand the other side. And so I think that's important. So Dayne, Ana, even just in some of your conversations that you guys have had around these topics, what are some passages of scripture that have become your go-to to speak into these tensions?
I would say for me, Romans 12:18. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all people, depending on your translation. And here's why that is. We love to communicate the idea of peace, not as a worldly peace. A lot of times when people think of peace, they think of it as like a standstill. They think of it as like no issues. And I don't think that is the biblical view of peace. Jesus was the Prince of Peace. Are we really going to be able to say that Jesus was the Prince of nothing, or Prince of just calmness? Yes, he was the priest of, like when he told the sea to be at peace. But the idea is that there would be of unity, there would be one of love. And I believe that that's the Jesus that we serve. And that's the idea. So for us, what we have tried to do is to disarm in our own, the way that we kind of like speak into this thing is try to disarm people and assume the best. One of the things that we talk a lot about is that we try to lead with love and not suspicion. So, culturally, and one of the things that I fight against is, especially when I'm in situations in rooms where, I'm in the minority or I'm not sure the outlook of people, I've been tempted in the past to assume racism or to assume prejudice. And it's hard not to get from that. And like just from over the course of history would tell us, and history would inform minority men and women, that is a safe judgment call to make. But I'll tell you one of the instances that really changed my outlook on this. I remember the first time I went out to visit her family out in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. I'm not being disrespectful. I could not find that place on my own. I've never seen so many stars in my life. Dakota, Illinois,
population 300.
Yeah. And so we
more cows and pigs than people.
Yeah. So that's the profile. And we went out to visit for Thanksgiving. And I remember, I've heard about these people. I've even met a few of them beforehand. But I remember before Thanksgiving dinner, your grandmother was, she made it a point just to say, like, we're about to pray, right? And she pointed me out. She says, Dayne, I want you to know that you're welcome here. And she even started to get tears in her eyes saying, you're welcome here. Now, here's the thing. There had been no conversation. There had never been an issue. There was no reason for her to do this, but this older woman, made it a point to extend from herself the idea that, you have no reason to be suspicious here, that I want to live at peace with you. We invite you into our home and we love you. So for me, that meant the world to me. And until the woman died, I always cherished that. It always meant the world to me that, that she made it a point to say that. Everybody had been kind and nice and things, and, but it disarmed any suspicion that I would have had, because there was an effort to live peaceably. So
I think
Romans 12:18.
Yeah, I think the other thing about that verse too is the phrase, as far as it depends on you. Because one, I think that's a call to, so often we think that if I just don't rock the boat, that's peace. But the as far as it depends on you calls us to an intentionality to pursue peace. But it also acknowledges that if there is a racist worldview from someone, and we're going to try and be intentional to pursue peace with them, but there is also the acknowledgement that that not everyone wants to live at peace with you, and so I think that verse is really so important in acknowledging that there are some attitudes that people hold, and we're going to do our best to try to educate them, because I really think that is the goal, but that doesn't happen in one conversation.
And I think, just as a bonus one, we'd be remiss. So our name of the church that we're planting is Church at the Well. And in John chapter 4, something that's always left an impression on us is, when Jesus, the appointment that Jesus had with this woman, sometimes folks communicate it as this was not the usual way that someone would, the road that someone would take to get to where they were going. But the passage says that Jesus had to go through this way. And if you look at a map, Sychar was the shortest distance. This was the way to go. But because culturally, the idea was to go a different way to avoid a different people group. And I think that just speaks to the whole, in Jesus, that there is no avoidance of people. There is an intentionality of making sure that you interact and touch people of a different background, specifically because of the gospel. The gospel informs us to love people. So I don't want to communicate is that because of the gospel, I gotta meet people of other cultures. I gotta be more open-ended. No, the fact that the love of Christ wells up in me, and it creates a spring, right? That's what it says in John chapter 4, a spring of life that can't help but love the people around me. You see what I'm saying? So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When we're doing our best to follow the example that Christ has given us, it doesn't matter who we encounter. It doesn't matter where we're at. It doesn't matter. Our job, our role is to love them, love others, right? And love them towards God. And so I think that's well said, bro. with even like with this, with racism existing in our world today, and we've talked about our goal for this conversation is we want to help equip people. We probably have a lot of people who are going to watch this video, whether we've got a dozen or so people who are live with us. By the way, if you're watching live with us on Zoom, there's a Q&A box at the bottom. If you have any questions for us, feel free to drop questions in there, and I'll throw them to these guys when we can, and where we can splice them in. But I think really for a lot of us, we have to wrestle with how do we fight against this? What does that look like? What thoughts are invoked in your guys' mind of like, what do we do as believers who live in a culture where racism is real and it exists? How do we fight against that?
I'm going to forget the source, but I just actually saw this as on Twitter yesterday, was that being anti-racist doesn't mean that you are guaranteed free of racism. It says that the work of fighting against racism really begins with yourself. And so I think that we can apply that to us as individuals, but also us as a church. And so as believers, sometimes it's much easier, as we know, to look out at the world and say, the world is doing this, there's sin here, there's sin. What are we doing as a church that ensures that people of different backgrounds are feeling safe? Because I think that issue of safety socially is really a big question. Yeah. Are people going to feel welcome when they walk into their church? Are they going to feel like they identify with others as they look around? And so that looks different in a lot of church contexts. Yeah. But I think also just going back to being intentional in how we have these conversations. I think a lot of people, it's a touchy subject, right? Like this is the thing that we don't talk about. And I just think that is to everyone's detriment. Just like this other friend, there's been other conversations that I've had over the years where I'm shocked, someone that I know from church, someone that I've interacted with for years, and they say something and I'm like, wait a minute. You and I have never talked about this, and the way that you think about race is really unacceptable to me. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, it's interesting that especially over the last 5-10 years, we found that so many folks that we've been friends with and have relationships with had weird ideals and how like just the uninvolvement of themselves. And me or just a few Black friends would be the scapegoat. It's like, well, Dayne's different. He's not like one of those. That kid got shot because of his prior record. Dayne's different, and because I'm whatever. But I would just to add on to that, I think that the way that we my biggest thing is that I think pastors and leaders got to be the biggest cheerleaders. They got to be the biggest proponents. I had a mixed emotions, and I was so careful to stay off social media. That's been my thing. With this last Ahmaud Arbery situation, I had mixed emotions because on one side I was so happy and so proud, even inside of our own fellowship, just seeing the number of pastors and leaders in our fellowship speaking out against the tragedy. And not just in our fellowship, but just pastors and folks that I had been looking for to say something. I had been needing for, just the idea that they're with us and that they're, that they're taking a stance and that they're willing to vocalize and to call sin. So on one side, that's where I was. On the other side, and maybe this is flesh, maybe this is just frustration. My thought was, man, we've been waiting on you guys for a long time. We've been waiting. And this is even why, like, Aaron will tell you that, I had for a while, the third year when I was asked to come back and speak on race relations at Momentum, my suggestion was, I said, hey, we got these pastors and youth pastors of churches that are over hundreds. They don't need to hear from me. What else am I going to say? What is the Black youth pastor from PG County? What else am I going to say? It doesn't matter racism. Like you need one of these guys that's going to have it's going to have a more of an impact because, we have to get out of the mindset that the one who's being oppressed has the best viewpoint of it. You have the power for change. Yes, we can speak from our experiences, but you can speak from a place of truth as well, from what Scripture says. It's one thing like to be able to sit in the seat of saying like, hey, we need your help. And it's another thing to say like, hey, we need to help. So I think leaders and pastors got to be the biggest proponents. As we've seen this last situation, I was so glad. And it brought me to tears at one point to see, like, man, like, guys are speaking out against this and they're making their voices heard. We heard, I was talking to a guy yesterday, white pastor not far from here, spoke about it and spoke out, like, did a video and spoke about it on a Sunday morning, and had emails from 200 people saying that when we resume after COVID-19's over, they're not coming back to church because his willingness to insert himself in a situation that had nothing to do with them. Mind you, this church is not far from Baltimore, and people know about the issues that have happened in Baltimore. So and I'm like, how do you lose church members when you're not even meeting on Sundays? But that's besides the point, but just people's willingness to step in, I think, like, to be able to call sin sin. When you think about, what usually happens, pastors are willing to make comments and make stances against any other social issue. Homosexuality, we're saying something. Abortion, they're saying something. And I just always I think it makes a big difference when leaders are willing to say something.
Yeah, I think it's also just good to acknowledge that historically the civil rights movement was birthed out and propelled by Christians, largely church leaders in the South. Martin Luther King Jr. was a pastor first before he was a civil rights activist. And so there was a point in time where churches were making a very clear stand. Not all churches, but Christians took this as racism is a moral question. And so we need to address it as that. And I feel like in our current culture, racism is not treated as a moral issue so much as like, oh, you want to get into politics, and being able to say, like, that's actually not, it's a heart issue, And so the people who are best equipped to deal with a heart issue are people who talk about the things of the heart, who talk about the things of God. And truly we know that that God does the work of changing a person's heart.
I think another thing is, sorry, we got a little list here. We're ready for this one.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think another thing is that we have to be willing to confront the subtle and little things so that when the big national news things come, people aren't looking to see what we think about it. So, for example, like, if there are, just insensitive or hints of insensitive comments or racially charged, comments or things going on in your church, I think that those are opportunities to, pull people aside and to do some personal or in a smaller settings type of stance, so that when the Ahmaud Arbery situation comes up, or Freddie Gray or Trayvon Martin, like, when those issues come out, people already know. Like, they already know that you're for them. One of the guys that, well, I'll just give that out, but I think that's got to be, that's a little thing that people can do. If you know that there are issues or there are ongoing hints of just racial insensitivity. Some even call it racism, but just people just having, like, whether that's how they grew up or whether that's where they're coming from, and you're able to pull them aside and say, like, hey, is this the best way that we can live at peace with all people? Is this the best way that we can love people? Is this the best way that we are sharing the gospel and making room or earning the right to share the gospel with people from a different background? Those are conversations that'll be great, so that when the big situations comes, it's not like, whoa, I never knew pastor thought like this. So,
Yeah, I think that's really good, because there are lots of ways that we can go about dealing with it, and sometimes, as and I've been guilty of this as white evangelicals. When these kind of things come up, we go to social media and we think, I'm going to post, I'm going to use that hashtag I run with Mod, right? And we feel good about it because we're identifying, we're siding with something, we're trying to take up the cause. But really what I hear you saying is it's got to be more than just a one-time social media post that we're trying to fit in with our culture, or it may be about something else. And I'm not trying to judge people who are posting that. I think that's wonderful of promoting and shedding light on it. But we also have to check our heart. Like, are we doing something because it's a trend or it's a fad? Or is it really our hearts? Like, I've Dayne, you've inspired me even, and have talked about other, podcasts and things that you've listened to that have helped you. And I've gone and done research on that, and to better understand of like, what are the ideals, what are the difficulties, what are the circumstances in every aspect of this that I don't understand because I'm a white guy living in Ohio now. And so it's hard. We have to wrestle with it.
But I'll say this, Eric, I mean, like one thing that I really appreciate specifically, and I'll, we've been on this whole give people roses when you get the opportunity to, specifically folks like you and the president of CE, Jeff Bogue, and there's some others, Mark is another one. I've always been impressed by people that are willing to, and this is another point, like are willing to, say what they mean and say what they want. It's one thing when we make, in church, we are famous for making big invitations, right? Momentum Youth Conference. And everybody come to know Jesus. If you're there, it doesn't matter. And this is a phrase that I always like key on. When people say it doesn't matter. I think you are going, if you want somebody to be at something, or if you want to have a relationship with somebody, you have to say it. No man would stand up in front of a whole like cafeteria at College of Women and say, who wants to be my girlfriend? Anyone come now. If you want to have a significant relationship, if you want somebody to feel wanted, if you want them to have a relationship with them, you are going to be intentional with it. I remember when I first got into youth ministry, I walked into CE National's Leadership Summit. Eric sees me and Colin walk in and calls us over to come sit with them. I don't know these people. I knew Eric, and he knew me. He invited me to sit next to him. Now, again, I'm not going to pretend like I'm the sob story of all racial injustice, but stuff like that matters, man. I think I think that so much of our ministries and our churches, we set them up in a way where, we think this is going to be the most popular, this is the way that we want to do it. But what ends up happening, and this is not my quote, this is Albert Tate. Albert Tate says, pastor out in California says, a lot of our churches are set up for Sunday, but not set up for eternity, meaning that we're not all inclusive, or we're not doing things specifically to reach people. Am I saying that every church needs to go out and make sure they hire a black guy, hire a Hispanic guy, make sure you get an Asian in your staff? That's not what I'm saying. But as far as when we are looking to build relationships and we're looking to disciple people and building up leaders, you better believe that you need to be intentional about going to somebody instead of making an all call. And any other thing, we'll be willing to target specific people and target like, hey, that kid shows great potential. He looks, sticky leaders, right? Right. Like that kid shows, he looks like a sticky kid. We can go and grab him. But it's one thing to say, you know what? It does matter that there's people outside my context. Like if we're going to reach this neighborhood, if we're going to be able to have a broader reach of people around us, if we're going to look like the globe, if we're going to look like the nations, how am I facilitating that? Or how am I intentionally going after people that I know nothing about? And some folks would say, Dayne, how am I going to relate? I don't know the music. I don't know the dress. I know nothing about basketball. I know nothing about whatever this thing is. And what we found in 7 years of youth ministry, and Eric could probably attest to this, it's more about being relational. You know how many things that I've done that I have no clue what I'm doing? I still don't know anything about anime. But the kids that do, the kids that do these were kids that I discipled every single week, and that's and for me, like, not that we have all the answers, but what I've found, more success in, I've discipled my wife. We've had personal discipleship relationships with every race, color that's come into our room. And what I found is that at the end of the day, they know that I love them, not in spite of who they are, but because of who they are. So.
Yeah, that's good. I think it would be easy probably for us in I know you guys are well studied in this, especially as you're planning a church and you're studying other churches and you're looking at effective ministry models. And I'm sure we could talk for a while about ways that the church has done this wrong in not bridging the gap or the cultural divide where racism exists. But what are some things that you guys have seen where the church has done it right and helped to bridge that gap and bring, unity in our culture and in racism?
I think we visited a church a couple months ago, McLean Bible Church out here in Virginia. And I was struck, there was a couple sitting in front of us, and they had headphones in and they were holding iPhones. And this is me confessing, like, right? Like, I didn't go in with love and trust. I'm like, what are y'all doing on your phones? Get off your phones.
This is David Platt.
Why are you not listening? And then I start to look around and I'm seeing more and more people they have an incredible system. They have so many people who do not speak English at their church that they have this incredible system where people can go and they borrow legit an iPhone and headphones, and they're listening to a live translation during service. Yeah. I was blown away because this isn't like, here's where the English service is and here's where just, one Spanish service is, which by the way, they had it too. But this was almost every language. I was blown away. And so not every church can model that. I got that, like we don't all have those resources, but what they did specifically, and Dayne and I were talking about this yesterday too, is that your church demographic is only going to match the community. You can't say we want one person from every nation well, you probably don't have every nation surrounding your community. But being able to really look at the demographics of your community and saying like, how can we match that? I think one thing as we've been having conversations about what church looks like after we are all out of these lockdowns, and how this has been a time of resetting and people really considering like, what are all the things I'm going to add back to the calendar? And as people are having those conversations, and just thinking through like, how can you partner with other churches? Not everybody has to have 3 outreaches a month on their calendar. How can you partner with another church? Everybody is very familiar with the quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that says Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. And unfortunately in 2020, that still rings so true. So if I say, about the Black church in your neighborhood, most people like really do know that. How can you partner with them? Maybe it's just saying like, hey, we see that you're having a youth event. Can we share we're going to send some chaperones and some pizza, and what is that really about? It's just about building relationships. But being able to partner in those ways, I think sometimes, and as we are planting a church, we really sometimes get into this too of like, we're not the only church in the area. We're not the only believers who want to see the gospel spread here. We're not the only people who have a heart for Jesus. But how can we come alongside and partner in that? And isn't that such a beautiful picture of what Jesus has done?
I think I'll even take a step back from that in that just a willingness to ask questions. Mm-hmm. I feel like, especially, as churches progress, we feel it necessary to be impressive. We have, it's like Momentum's a great example. Like we are so produced and we do a great job. We put it on, and a part of that is like having all the questions answered, having everything, form fit to knowing what we want to do, knowing our style, knowing how we do things. And I think a great suggestion or a great thing to do is to ask questions. Is this, how is this reaching people? How is this, how is this helping our the people who come who don't know Jesus, who are followers of Jesus that want to become better followers of Jesus? How is this helping our followers of Jesus? How are we putting them on mission to reach other people? How are we, how is what our programs are and the way that we do worship and all these things, how is this enabling them to do this at a better rate, or doing this better and more efficiently, or doing this with more passion? So, and that's a hard one because, we're really good at doing the things that we're really good at doing. We're really, and that may sound weird, but like, we want to do that. You know what I'm saying? We want to do the things that we want to do worship the way that we've done it. And I'm not saying we change. Let's start doing gospel music because we want to reach more Black people. No, you're going to look crazy, but at the same way, you're asking questions, and you're asking key leaders, and you're asking leaders in communities and folks how you can better reach the people that God has put right there in your area to do so.
Yeah, I think that's important because like I was, kind of confessing and explaining to you guys, like, I don't understand, what it's like to be a Black person that's living in America today. And yet if I'm a pastor and I'm going to plan my services then around what it looks like without understanding that from a different cultural perspective or dynamic or whatever you want to say, like you have to get outside of we have to do the same thing even with, non-believers and walk through your doors and your church building with a fresh set of eyes. You've got to look at what you're doing, even your online service of, how are the people in your community watching? You can take that principle and apply it to anything. And so I think it's important for you guys as you're thinking through, hey, we're planning a church, talk to me about what are some of your goals, your thoughts, dreams of how you want to promote diversity within your church. What does that look like for you guys?
Well, we obviously we love the story of in John chapter 4. We love this idea that Jesus came close to this woman that was far from him, that he, embraces her, sin and all, offers her living water. So he offers her salvation, living water. And then she leaves that place with passion, with mission. And that's really like what we keep coming back to. One of the things that I want, that we've tried to do is we want to accept people as a way of getting our community to accept us. I think one of the things that we've always just tried to lead from youth ministry to friendships and things is, this is Dayne and Ana, like, come into our house, lay down, you need a blanket, you need a cup of coffee, like, this is who we are. And, we got open arms. And I think like if we lead from a place where, as we're engaging people, we have arms open wide, even as we've like communicated what we're doing, we don't have, when it comes to strategy or what we're going to sound like and things like that, we want to do what's best for reaching people. And that's difficult because like you mentioned before, I've looked at models and I have my pastors and even in our fellowship, I look at folks and I'm saying like, man, if we can look like that, I would be satisfied. But I think that's an idol that I have to die to almost daily, because the goal is kingdom. The goal is that we would see people we would see people become better followers of Jesus. And what that means as far as like models and things, well, we're going to figure that out along the way. But yeah,
I think that, while we were in youth ministry, when we started in youth ministry, both of us kind of said, like, we could do this forever. Mm-hmm. Like, let's be those 7-year-old people at Momentum.
Yeah.
Like,
complaining about the music.
Right. Like we were in it forever. And God was really just working on our hearts. But one of the events that happened in the midst of that was Freddie Gray dying in Baltimore in the custody of the police. And then the way that the city responded to that. I'm a high school teacher. That week, I happened to have a field trip planned to Baltimore, and the county said no trips to Baltimore at all. So it wasn't even truly my decision. But as I had to reach out, we were going to a theater, and hearing from that individual who was saying, this is going to impact our city for a really long time. And he was begging me to bring my students. And as I talked with my students about it and really hearing their perspective, but it broke my heart because my students kind of said, that's just Baltimore. There were race riots there in the 60s. Like, this is a history in the city. And a lot of people like to point that finger but really it's brokenness. We know that it's brokenness, and we know that all people are broken in different ways. And so when God was really working on us and just kept bringing us back to Baltimore and breaking our hearts for this city, this was a thing that we couldn't take out of it. This racial tension component couldn't be kind of removed from this whole conversation. Yeah. So in all of that, does an interracial couple moving to Baltimore to try and plant a church resolve all of that? No, absolutely not. And we don't have all of those answers. But we do know a God who heals. So we are looking to be people who are willing to talk about racial reconciliation. We're certainly not saying that we've got it all figured out, or that it's easy, or that it's quick. But we're happy to talk about it. And I think that is especially something here that I think is refreshing.
Yeah, you guys, I love that, because that shows your heart. It's not that you're Dayne, you said it well. You're not trying to set up some model after another church that you've seen elsewhere. You guys you're being real. You're being who God's created you to be. And that, I think, is really at the bottom line of all of it for each of us, that, the best part of what we're going to be able to do to help ease the tension of race and ethnic diversity and all of that is for us to be ourselves and to love Jesus and to love others the the way that the Bible instructs us to, and the way that Christ himself modeled. And so thank you for sharing your heart with us on that, and being raw and real about all of it. One last question, then we'll get to some of the questions that people were asked. I just would be curious to know, as you guys, I believe firmly that part of what we can do as believers is engage in conversations exactly like this, where we may not have the answers, we may not know exactly what to say, we may have fears about things, but to press in and engage in a tough conversation. And Dayne, you said it, ask questions. So what are other ways that you guys would encourage believers to engage in these conversations that would help bring unity, rather than oftentimes what you see on social media? It creates more division. So what would be some encouragement you guys would give to our viewers today?
I think being educated and being informed, as you've mentioned, social media, as well as news outlets, it can sometimes not always paint facts as facts, right? But I think that making sure that you're trying to stay informed and know what you're talking about. Now, it can't start with you trying to volunteer information. And I'll confess, like, that is where I have certainly gone wrong, because as soon as somebody brings up the topic, I'm like, and this, and I'm ready. But I think it has to start with asking questions and with listening. We know that even with Jesus, with the woman at the well, he didn't say, like, hey, I hear that you have some issues with the men in your life. He said, go and get your husband. And she was able to respond to that. And so I think, like, asking questions and being able to listen to where people are coming from. Once people feel heard, they feel accepted, and they're so much more willing to listen then to the information that you have. So I think that in those conversations too, I know, like, in a church setting where we're gathering for small groups every week and we're saying that, like, we're doing life together, a lot of times that becomes, as we're talking about the Bible and how to apply it, we're talking about parenting, talking about relationships, and we're talking about our workplace. And a lot of times it doesn't extend beyond that. And do we need biblical application in those areas? Absolutely. I do every day. I got to ask God to help me be a better wife and a better mom every day. But just in remembering that the Bible consistently talks about the orphan and the widow, the weak, and the persecuted. And so God has not forgotten those people. So we cannot do so either. So it's got to be that, in our regular conversation, this isn't something that's glossed over.
Yeah, super well said. Yeah. All right. One of the questions somebody asked in to us, what's your recommendation for those churches who live in areas where it's primarily a white population, right? Not everybody gets to live in PG County or in Baltimore. So what would your recommendation be for those pastors who their broader context of their community is the white middle class America? How do they reach out and to have an ethnically diverse community within their church? What would be some suggestions there?
I think it's like anything else. I think that, we there's so much scripture about preparation. It's so much about, like, you prepare for the harvest. Even in John 4, Jesus talks about, do you see the fields are ripe for harvest? We have a God of order and one that prepares. I think these are conversations that you can have well ahead of the story of our church. Well, you mentioned, like, models and things that we've seen. Well, we didn't even mention our own church. Hopefully our pastor Clark isn't watching. Well, one of the things in our history, there was a predominantly white church living in Temple Hills, Maryland. And Temple Hills back then didn't look like Temple Hills now, which is where I grew up. And they, our church actually, in preparation for, the neighborhood changing when DC kind of changed and lots of people moving out of the city into the suburbs into Maryland. Our church actually moved a little bit farther down into Southern Maryland in preparation for the neighborhood changing. So our pastors and our leaders at the times kind of saw that this may be an issue, but they wanted to prepare the hearts of the people so that as the neighborhood's changing, the church would change as well, hopefully, and to better reach the neighborhood and to better reach the people around them. Little did we know it wasn't just going to be that neighborhood, but a predominantly white church merge with a predominantly Black church. That's the story of Grace Brethren of Clinton. So I think like for a church in that scenario, man, look, I'm not going to be able to talk about, census trends and who's going to move into the neighborhoods. But I think that there are questions that can be asked of how would we, what would we do if we had a Black family show up in our church last week? How would, how is our ministry set up? How are we able to ask those questions? What questions can we ask? What are some things that we can do so that we can bring the gospel to that family? This could be their church home before they ever show up. Because the assumption shouldn't be that we're always going to look like we're going to look like, and make sure that it's not just an assumption, but a hope that we always look like the way that we look like. We want kingdom. That's what we want. We don't want to just go to Urban Hope once a year or go to Momentum where we see the Black kid and whoop, we get our multicultural ministry. The hope is that we do look like the kingdom. So even in those areas, we ask ourselves the questions of, what are some things that would be big, big turnoffs or big things about the way that we're set up. I'm not talking about watering down the gospel, because the gospel is involved in mending broken relationships. So again, just pointing back to asking questions.
Yeah, I like that too, because I think each church obviously has to identify with what's God calling them to do as a church. And if it may not be reaching the minorities that are in your area, but maybe it's equipping your people to go out and reach the world. And maybe that's not even in your backyard, but maybe that's going to Haiti, or that's going, to another area where God's leading you. And so every church has to figure that out, exactly like you're saying, and ask those questions of themselves and trust where God's leading them. One more question for you. I thought this was a good one from one of our female viewers. She said, I would not naturally engage a man in conversation who is white that I don't know, but often feel when I'm in a situation with a man of a different race that I should engage him because I don't want him to think I'm not engaging with him because of his race. So if you're following, she says, what would you suggest a female do in that situation? She said, if I'm engaging someone because of their skin color to alleviate a social tension, isn't that still I'm differentiating them because of their race? What are your thoughts here? That's really good.
It gets so complex when we start talking about race and gender, and it becomes certainly complex, and we cannot boil down humanity to being either Black or white. There's so many other factors at play. And actually, Dayne and I have talked about multiple days where I was going to work with the kids, and then he was going and sitting at coffee shops just to be in the community and meet people. And he would try to talk to women, and all the women thought he was hitting on them. Yeah. And it did not.
I was not, by the way.
No, we did not. We did have, he lost his wedding ring for some time, and I was like, okay, you can't go talking to women in the coffee shops, even without you. Anyway. Yeah.
I show a picture, it's like, hi, my name's Dayne. This is my wife. We're planning a church.
So that's something that you have to consider. And so I think honestly, as women, we are not usually the people who are like, hi, strange man, welcome. I would like to engage and have a conversation with you. No. And that's really awkward. And I think acknowledging that you're feeling a pressure to engage with people of a different background is something that you've got to start questioning, just even within yourself, of why do I feel that pressure? And sometimes we create social pressures that shouldn't really exist, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is that if you want to engage a white man in a random setting, if you want to pursue a conversation with him, then placing the expectation on yourself to pursue a conversation with a Black man in that setting is really still not acknowledging that these people are truly equal, mm-hmm. right? I think that speaking as a female and all of the issues that we have to acknowledge with just what goes on with sexism occasionally, I think it's okay to say I'm not going to pursue a conversation with this man in this particular setting. If this person is someone who shows up at your church or a church event and there's reason to engage, then do that, but I think that sometimes we can feel convicted about situations where it doesn't make sense for us to feel convicted about it. The only factor there is race. And so we have to acknowledge that, you know, am I trying to overcorrect in some ways? And that's maybe not helpful either. I mean, honestly, right, and you can speak to this too, if a random white lady starts talking to Dayne and he's like, whoa, like, you know, like sometimes that can create an awkwardness too. Now, Dayne's great with people, so he's going to turn it into a joke and, you know, move on. But there's a lot of complexity there. And so I would say, like, let yourself off the hook a little bit and explore what's really going on in your heart, if that's not a conversation you would usually have.
And I'm going to pastor this up in a real quick, because I think that one of the things that I've noticed, even as we've been living here, like we literally moved in here in our home here in Towson a couple of days before we were told to quarantine and not leave our house. Sorry, our dog's barking. And he'd been quiet this whole time until just now. And so, you know, we're ready to build relationships. I'm really extroverted. And just even here in our neighborhood, I've been making sure I speak to people and making sure I engage people. You know, white lady that lives by herself a few houses down. One day I just saw her out and I just said, you know, good morning, and knew that she was kind of like, who is this, you know, black man, you know, talking to me? And what I just, you know, like quietly to myself, just like, Holy Spirit, just, you know, can I just disarm her? Can I just disarm her or any inhibitions, whatever that I can just project, you know, just to help, you know, make her know that this conversation's okay. And that was it. You know, that's the pastor answer. But I really do believe in the power of the Holy Spirit enabling believers, you know, to do what we naturally can't do. I mean, in that situation, like there is awkwardness, but, you know, a lot of folks tell you, a lot of these pastors tell you that a lot of relationship building, a lot of intentional going after people happens in the awkward places. It does. It's very awkward when, you know, when people that have no idea why I'm speaking to them or engaging them just from, you know, out of where I'm from or what I look like, it's awkward. But at the same time, like, I think that's where so much of the going after people happens is in those awkward situations. I tell people all the time that, you know, I have no right or I have no reason to ever limit myself in reaching to Caucasians or to any other race, because one, I was brought to know Jesus by a white woman, and the person who gave the message, that told me about heaven and hell and told me about Jesus dying for my sins was a white man. And that was the best gift that I could ever been given. So in the same way, you know, I try to honor people in that way. And it's just allowing those awkward opportunities to happen and allowing God to inspire us in those times and allow the Holy Spirit to speak through us, really. And, you know, like I said, I'm too extroverted at times. At the same time, I think for my wife who's introverted, for anyone else, that we can allow God to use us in those times and allow the awkward situations to work out for good.
Man, thank you guys. Thank you very much for engaging in this conversation. Even what you guys were just saying was reminding me a couple of weeks ago, we had Greg Steer on from Dare to Share for a digital lab. And he just talked about the impact that somebody had of saying, you know, challenging him when he was a young boy, of like looking at everybody and you know, having a sign on their forehead that said bound for hell, and that changed his perspective. And I think that's got to be our reality, regardless of people's color, regardless of what assumptions we make about them in those awkward moments and awkward situations. We've got to look at people as they're lost, and if they don't know the Lord, you know, we have an opportunity to share it with them, whether it's, you know, in passing with a smile and breaking down those barriers, as you're saying, with a neighbor, praying for them, looking for opportunities to share the gospel and the hope that we have. So thank you guys for joining us today. It's been a joy and a delight. If you're new with us on the Digital Labs, I'd encourage you to check us out on CE National on our Facebook page, our YouTube channel. You can find us on buildmomentum.org on the Digital Lab page to sign up for more that we're going to have coming up in the weeks to come. So thank you, Carraways, for joining us. Say hello to your children for me and give them hugs. So they did an excellent job eating snacks and being quiet. So we're glad to have you guys on. Dayne, would you just pray for us and our viewers who are watching today?
Absolutely. Father God, first of all, we recognize you as holy. You are above all. You are transcendent. We want to recognize you as our creator. And what you've told us is that you created us with your image. We all bear the image of you, God. And that is the reminder that we need so often, is what I have in common with my wife, with my brother Eric, with our viewers, is that we were created with the image of you. So we have so much in common. We have more in common than what should separate us. God, we live in a fallen world because of our sin, because of sin of over the course of human history. But because you have given us salvation, because you've given us purpose in life, you've called us to speak a difference. You've called us to be a difference. You've called us to love people. And may the way that we engage and love people, not in spite of our differences, but because of our differences, may that be what brings people to the cross, that makes us a stronger body. God, may we see less white churches and Black churches and Hispanic churches, but more churches that represent what the kingdom will look like. May we continue to see unity. May we continue to see us working together. May we continue to see discipleship relationships across racial lines. May we continue to see people who genuinely love each other and who become families, God. So often we don't use friendships, the word friendship, we use the words family, because we believe you called us to be your families. You called us your sons and daughters. May we be families, may we be brothers and sisters that reflect your love in the lives of one another. God, as long as sin exists, there will be a difference. But I pray that you would give courage and confidence to the leaders of our churches, to those who make an impact in our communities, that would be willing to call sin, and that we would be that we would be people of safe spaces, and that we would be represent hope and places of acceptance to those in our community. So not only do they feel the love from us, but they can see you when they look at us. We love you, Jesus. We thank you for your sacrifice for us on the cross. May you just bless us as we go throughout our day and this week. Thank you so much for seeing Ashley and their willingness to put this on as well. Your holy precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for checking in. On behalf of the Carraways, my name's Eric Miller. We're signing off. Have a good one.